So Jon Stewart is coming to the defense of Dave Chappelle over his controversial special. Here's a headline in The Hill. Jon Stewart offers support for Chappelle. Quote, intention is never hurtful. So let me give you a little bit more of what he says here. Jon Stewart said that Chappelle's, quote, intention is never hurtful. He's just not that kind of person. He said Dave is, quote, good and decent. Quote, I love that dude as a person. He's one of my favorite people on the planet. Now, in the article, they point out as well that Dave Chappelle was leaving the door open to a discussion with members of the transgender community. His representative said, quote, Dave stands by his art. No more jokes about transgenders until we can all laugh together. That's one of the things that he said in the special. Quote, the streets are talking and Dave is listening. At some point, when everyone is open, I'm sure the communities will come together. And in a brief interview with TMZ, Jon Stewart said, if this spurs a conversation where people get more on the same page in terms of understanding, that'd be great. So this is Jon Stewart basically coming to, I think, a relatively strong defense of Dave Chappelle here. There are some people on the left who don't think this is a good defense. My take on it is it's a wonderful defense. In fact, it's one of the same points I made in my multiple segments on this. Look, when it comes to art, when you're talking about the realm of art, as long as the intention is not outwardly bigoted, xenophobic, hurtful on purpose, then art gets a pass. It just does. The example that I've been giving nonstop is that The Sopranos, HBO TV show, is widely viewed as one of the best, if not the best, shows of all time. And there are parts of it, challenge any of you to go back and watch it, that are wildly racist. Tony Soprano's daughter dates a black guy, and he dropping N-bombs left and right. I mean, just there's no doubt about it. It's clearly racist. And the NAACP didn't come out and say, you should pull this and nobody should watch this, and here's a list of demands we have over it. They understand that it's part of the show, and if anything, it's sort of illuminating a mindset that probably existed without a doubt in mafia culture in the 80s, 90s, 2000s, probably to this day. So I can give 1,000 examples of whether it's movies, comedy specials, other forms of art, music, where there's problematic stuff in there. But as a general rule, people kind of keep their powder dry for real systemic reform and changes which could materially improve the lives of oppressed communities and everybody in the conversation. So the point I've made about transgender people is it's still legal in this country in over 20 states to say, I'm not going to hire you because you're transgender, or I'm going to fire you because you're transgender, or get out of my store, you're transgender and I think it's weird. In over 20 states, you wouldn't have a case. If you're a transgender person, you walk into a store in some rural backwoods area in Mississippi and they're like, we don't serve your kind, get out. You would lose your case because the transgender community is not part of any non-discrimination protections. They're not a protected class. So that's a real systemic problem that materially affects trans people in a horrendous way. And instead of harnessing all the energy towards let's petition Biden to sign an executive order to get trans people as a protected class, to have anti-discrimination protections for trans people, all the anger is being directed at Netflix and at a comedian, and some people are saying, hey, you better pull that special down, and then others are saying, don't pull it down, but here's my list of demands. We want trigger warnings before anything that might be bigoted on Netflix, and we want basically like a fairness doctrine type thing where any content they view as transphobic is balanced with stuff that's viewed as pro-trans. And I just think it's an opportunity missed. And any of the attempts to get it flat out pulled, I would just categorize that as authoritarian. And if anything, it's going to lead to a massive backlash against the trans community, or at the very least the people who are protesting here and saying, here are demands, because the demands I don't think are reasonable. And I have to be honest about that. I have to keep it real with you guys. I'm not going to come out here and say, I think it's fair and I think it's just simply because it's coming from an oppressed group. That doesn't mean you turn off your brain and you just have to concede on everything. So Jon Stewart is right. Jon Stewart is right. Now, listen, are there areas where intention doesn't matter as much? Well, yeah. I think that when you talk about people literally dying, maybe intention doesn't matter as much. I mean, it still matters, right? There's a difference between manslaughter and murder, and the law reflects that you get less time in prison if it's manslaughter versus if it's murder. But maybe it's not as relevant because somebody died, and you assess the crime based on the damage it did to the victim. But when it comes to art, again, I've always had this position. I've advocated for it on this show 1,000 times over. It largely gets a pass because unless it's purposefully hurtful, bigoted, transphobic, whatever, then I don't see how there can be any reasonable standard where you say, pull it down, I don't like it, without opening the door for everybody to say, pull it down, I don't like that, pull it down, I don't like that. I mean, I told you guys my mom watched The Sopranos and was like, I don't like the way it portrays Italians because, I come from an Italian family. She's Italian. And I listen to that and I go, you're sort of being like oversensitive here, aren't you? It's a mafia show. It's about the mafia. So like, sort of get over it. But I feel the same way about what's happening with the trans community here. The ones who are protesting, the people who are walking out of Netflix. You might not like the special. Don't fucking watch it. That's it. Or write a rebuttal and do an article on it. And some people did do that. And there was even one criticism that I thought was reasonable. There was one criticism that was like, I'm not asking you to stop making trans jokes. I'm asking you to stop making the same trans jokes that effectively aren't funny. That was one person's response. That's fair. And in that article, they didn't even say, hey, we want you to pull down the special. So that's fair. But anybody who wants to pull it down or anybody who wants to radically change Netflix as a result of this, I think they're, what's the saying? Missing the forest through the trees? Something like that? Missing the forest for the trees? You get the point. So I think Jon Stewart is 100% correct. Dave Chappelle is not a hateful person. That's very clear if you watch all of his stand-up specials. He means well and is a comedian making jokes, and it clearly resonated. This is one of those ones where the critics gave it super low ratings, but the public gave it really high ratings. Now, me personally, I watched the special, and I don't think it's his best work. I think it was maybe a little too preachy and not enough putting the funny before the preachiness, but that doesn't matter. It is what it is. I don't want it pulled, and he even says, I'm not going to talk about this issue anymore until we're all laughing together. And so, as far as I'm concerned, it's squashed. But it would be good if the energy was geared towards real systemic change to help marginalized communities, as opposed to an authoritarian overreach to control art, pull it down, or micromanage it to the point where it's not funny, and nothing's ever funny. In the same way, I tell my mom to sort of roll with the punches here. If you don't like how The Sopranos portrays Italians, so be it. If it's art. And what Dave Chappelle did here is art, whether or not you like it. So, again, I think Jon Stewart is 100% on point here. I think the intentions matter massively when it comes to art. And if you don't like it, don't watch it. Or write some sort of rebuttal or whatever. But to take it down or put trigger warnings on all potentially bigoted stuff on Netflix, I think goes too far. Some fairness doctrine thing on Netflix goes too far. Some fund with equal money to what Dave Chappelle got for trans entertainers. I think that goes too far too, because Dave became #1 comedian in the world and paid his dues and worked his way up from nothing and been working since the 1990s until today. And you just want to pick random trans entertainers and give them the equivalent of what Chappelle got. Chappelle probably got tens of millions of dollars. So what you're saying is just give it to me based on the fact that I'm trans and nothing else. That goes too far. And I have no problem whatsoever with some sort of fund to develop trans talent or whatever. That's fine. But my understanding is, if you look at Netflix, the stuff that's on Netflix, they've already done a lot for trans issues. In fact, they have a number of pro-trans documentaries, movies, what have you, on there. And they make that point. And also, they've hired a diverse array of people, and they make that point. So, effectively, we're kind of at an impasse here in a way. Because on the one hand, you have people saying, if you don't like it, that sucks, but it is what it is. There will be no authoritarian takedowns. There will be no micromanaging of Netflix. And on the other hand, you have people who say, well, here's our list of demands. Well, again, I don't think there can be a resolution on that front, but all I would say is harness that energy towards actual positive systemic change. And beyond that, I think Netflix will continue to try to have balanced perspective because that's what they were doing in the first place anyway. But the outrage and the uproar over what this Chappelle special is, I think is a little much, to say the least. Tired of seeing nonstop articles about one particular comedy special that sort of made the world come to a standstill. Again, as opposed to, I've been following the reconciliation bill negotiation, $3.5 trillion package now being whittled down to under $2 trillion. You have free college now being left out. They might even leave out lower prescription drug prices. They're shortening the window massively for the child tax credit. All these things materially hurt people so much. And there is 1/20th the coverage for that versus this culture war nonsense. And I think that's incredibly damaging and destructive and terrible and negative. So we should focus more on what's going on with that package as opposed to this stuff, because if we harness all of our energy towards positive ends fighting on that front, the outcome is a lot better than taking negative feelings and harnessing it towards pulling down a comedy special or micromanaging Netflix. Hey y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.